Hello, my name's Stephen Tierney, and I've always been fascinated by learning both in the classroom and in the staff room. What I'm going to be chatting about today is a schema that I've devised over the past 18 months, which looks at how you might improve the quality of teaching and learning and the various stages. I suppose the things that I need to be honest about is it's undoubtedly incomplete and almost certainly will have some errors in it. But it's useful sometimes to take the very complex process of teaching and learning and try and put together your ideas into something that's coherent, that you can work with and that you can share with others as I'm doing today. The very first schema that I put together came from hundreds of lesson observations that I'd done and conversations that I'd had with teachers, where some of the best teaching that I saw had an absolutely clear focus on the learning. And some of the teaching that maybe was less good tended to focus on activities which were either low challenge or added very little to the learning of students. And so I came up with this basic idea of keeping the learning gains tight. And the idea of tightening them further, which is the next stage in this particular schema, was around the idea that when you started watching teachers who used assessment very carefully, they would either slow down the lesson if it was required or they would speed it up, depending upon what they found with students. And so they tended to shift from their own plan to actually a focus on the learner. Now as I say, I've devised this and developed it over time. And what it now looks like is it also has assessment in there alongside the expected learning gains. It's got pedagogy and it's got student behaviour. I'm going to focus on those first two around assessment and expected learning gains because they're the ones that you can pre-plan before you go into the classroom and they're utterly interlinked. At its worst, sometimes in lessons you can see learning that's incidental or that's haphazard or weakly defined, and assessment is just an afterthought. Even where you've got more consistent assessment, if it isn't pre-planned, then it doesn't actually help define curriculum excellence. And part of the defining curriculum excellence is coming up with really challenging success criteria that people can see what is expected of them and the assessments that go alongside them. And these assessments become almost the milestones or the kind of way markers that allow you to guide students through the learning and find out which stage they're at. And by pre-planning these, everyone is clear about what's expected and where to next. Moving between these assessment milestones, you can sequence the learning and the structure of the learning. I tend to use solo as the best kind of theory of learning that I've ever used in the classroom to actually put together the expected learning gains, which become tighter. Now, all this is part of the plan, but the real magic, I think, starts to happen when you start looking at them in terms of so what happens if a student doesn't make a particular milestone. And I think there's two ways to go, and this is around closing the gap by either giving the feedbacks required and expecting the student to act on it, or actually looking at analysis of the assessments and thinking about which elements are required to be retaught. And it's this reteaching and finding time for reteaching alongside finding time for learner response that becomes important in the teaching programme. It's not just quickly moving from one thing to the next. It's now looking and thinking around the pedagogy. It's kind of very important to start thinking around the pedagogy. What's effective and what's not. It's kind of very important to start pedagogy we don't question what's effective and what's not. And sometimes it's ineffective. And some of the pedagogy we don't like question. Blood chase silver. And sometimes it's ineffective. This becomes the next great probably like many other people. Blood chase silver. When actually it's something that probably is the next great or not the best thing. When actually it's something within the blog post itself, there's a couple of links to the Education Endowment Foundation. There's a couple of links to the Education Endowment Foundation toolkit of strategy by John Hattie. And these are strategies where there's an evidence behind them that says, and these are strategies where there's an evidence behind them that says, well, these is more great starting. It's not certain, it's not definite. To think about the great practice that they're going to teachers, to think about it, to hone it in the classroom that they're going to do, and to start to look at it, to hone it in the classroom for that particular classroom, refining it in terms of contextualising it for that particular classroom, that particular and over time in that particular school, and teachers begin to develop the pedagogy, and over time they can actually look and define it to such a point that it starts to flow. There's a fluency around it. They're using pedagogy that's got some research evidence behind it that's effective. they contextualise it for their classroom, and they're beginning to look at things like lesson study where you can work with colleagues alongside to make sure the practice is the best that it can be. It wouldn't be complete, would it, if we didn't look at student behaviour. And what I think about here is the very minimum you've got to have is compliance. Students must follow the rules and they must follow the teacher's instructions and expectations. And there's various blog posts about, both on my blog and other people's, where they give you some strategies for this, including what we describe as the 5-minute behaviour plan that I put together with Teacher Toolkit, Ross McGill. And actually getting compliance is the starting point, because compliance itself won't lead to learning. But what we do need to do is we need to look at engagement. And engagement means time on task. Very simple definition. Are students spending time on task? And in terms of the on task, are they actually focused and thinking hard about what they're supposed to be learning? And that's a great quote from Robert Coe that I very much like. And so are students engaged? Are they on task? And are they focused hard on actually the learning that's expected of them? But there's a requirement to move them beyond this and for them to be able to become a resource for other learners and to use the resources around them, the teacher, the textbooks, the internet, their fellow students, to become more interdependent. And this requires a set of learning skills and social skills and personal skills. And all this is aimed at developing students who achieve but go beyond achievement and actually grow as individuals. And part of that growth will be about them making great life choices for themselves and for others. And that's the wisdom that we seek. This is the first in a series of posts that I hope to do. I'm going to follow up with 2 more posts around abandonment and what we might extend, because sometimes we have to give up things to become great. Hope you've enjoyed it.